I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee of Corte Madera. Don't see it on here, but let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so we start the meeting with open time. So if you have something that is not on the agenda that you wanted to talk about, now's the time to do it. And if you can restrict your comments, please, to 3 minutes, that would be especially helpful as well. Thank you very much. Hello, Cindy. And if you can please give your name also and...
Cindy, I don't think the microphone is on.
Need that on.
You. All right.
We're on TV, we need the...
I know.
Yeah.
I have to get this right. My name is Cindy Winter, and I live in Larkspur, and I'm delighted to be here and see Bob Berbazio in his accustomed place.
Thank you. Here. Good to be back. Yeah. Thank you.
I wanted to say a few words about Measure A because it does provide information for cyclists, and I'm afraid that at the October 18th meeting, a lot of people will already have been voting. So here's what I have to say briefly. Measure A extends the same current 1/2 cent sales tax for 30 years. TAM's request for a 3-decade term buys time to learn about and adapt to the new transportation era. Automated vehicles are coming. That is a fact. But when, where, and how, even the experts don't agree. That puts TAM in a quandary. To be intellectually honest, TAM cannot provide detailed plans 30 years out because nobody knows. Wisely, I think, TAM plans to work in 5-year increments. 5 years will offer reasonable foresight, and on the 6th year, TAM will hold meetings to review progress to date and discuss the next 5 years. This seems inadequate for cost, a conservative group of citizens, and influential. I'm told they want a specific to-do list, but they missed the larger picture that we're in a new place now where all bets are off. I think they try to reason things out. I think they might be talked with. We'll try. Another problem has been our friend David Schonbrun. He wants to kill Measure A. He has been insisting that Measure A requires an EIR, contrary to advice from the county council, citing a CEQA regulation, which David has been reminded of several times. It is important that the new Measure A passes. If it doesn't, TAM's reputation as reliable will take a hit, and they'll find major funding harder to come by or impossible. This would affect large projects soon and smaller ones down the line. For Bike Ped, TAM has been the rainmaker, finding grants for major improvements and using the present Measure A to provide 25 to 30% of complete streets, bike lanes, sidewalk, and transit. Measure A also provides the sustaining funding for safe routes to schools. For the driverless among us, TAM spends 55% of its sales tax income on transit of several kinds. I'm urging everyone here tonight to vote for Measure A. And here is some real good news. Jim Elias told me today that MCBC supports A, and I'll be meeting with him and Bjorn to pass on what I've learned. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Anybody else? Items not on the agenda.
Hi, I'm Janet Furman. I live in Corte Madera on Chapman. And I'm a cyclist. I ride the streets of Corte Madera and all of Marin almost daily. I don't like bumps. So I know we're all here to talk about big projects, and I'm all for those, but I just want to call your attention to some things that really are irritants to me. Ramps that aren't smooth, that connect the street to a multi-use path. And then there's like a lip that you... Another thing is all the construction work going on all over the county, all the trenches for pipe replacement. I know this is important work, but they need to fix the roads after they cut into them, and they're not doing it. And this is happening on my street, Chapman, and I've corresponded with the town about that and been told, oh, well, they plan to do it, but, you know, when they're good and ready, they're going to fix it. Right now, you know, a lot of the trench work is sloppily patched. There are steel plates everywhere that are really hard on bicycle tires. And what was the other thing? Sorry, I should have made notes. If I have a chance, I'll come back and bring it up, but okay, I'll let go at that for now.
Okay, thank you very much. And we are not allowed to discuss items. I mean, you can pass that on to Public Works. We're not allowed to discuss stuff that's not on the agenda. Anybody else who wanted to speak at public time, open time here? Okay, then we will move on to discussion items. And Peter, we are not changing anything on the agenda, right?
No, sir.
Okay. So then we're going to hear from Andrew Poster from Mill Valley, who's the Director of Public Works?
That's
Close
correct.
enough? Okay. Turn it
So
over to Andrew.
Well, thank you, Chair Vazzi.
Peter.
Just a few introductory comments. In terms of the board and the commissions and the councils don't discuss public comment, but I did want to respond at the staff level. You know, certainly we're working with TAM on the Measure A passing. It's critical. There's a few things that we've given them feedback on in terms of detail, but yeah, that's going to go to the voters to renew the countywide transportation half-cent sales tax. So those comments are duly noted. And to the other member of the citizen that talked about our pavement condition, I agree. We have not done a good enough job of being diligent with mostly the utility districts when they're doing work. We actually had a meeting this week with them to tell them that exact message, that you know, TAN standards need to be met, inspections need to occur. We do have a really good pavement replacement program, and that's going on. And some of those neighborhoods that have been impacted by PG&E mostly, and a little bit of MMWD work, are going to see new roadways coming forward, as well as an enhanced inspection and replacement program for the work on town streets. So that comment is duly noted. In terms of item number 4, which is before us now, the steps, lanes, and paths, that we're borrowing the term from Mill Valley, and we discussed this last time with BPAC, kind of in an introductory way. We have a desire and a capital improvement program listed project to look at our steps, lanes, and paths in Corte Madera to get them to better condition. A lot of them need replacement. We need to work on the trees that are underlying. We need to clear the pathways. And so it's a pretty expensive capital project. It's not going to happen in a year or two. It's going to be phased over time. And just to remind you all at BPAC, as well as the public, that discussion pointed a lot towards Mill Valley, because in the last 3 to 5 years that I know of, they've done the work that we envision doing in the next 3 to 5. And so we invited them. I listed the primary. We had to interpret your comments, and those are the public. And these were kind of the A through E, which we sent to Andrew, and he said he's going to do his best to answer those for us. So we'll turn it over this is our chance at Corte Madera to learn from what Mill Valley has done and to help us guide, the path forward as we develop our own steps, lanes, and path enhancements. So with that intro, thank you, Andrew, for coming over the hill. Please, sir, with the microphone.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So Peter, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for having me. I'm glad you guys think Mill Valley is one of the, I guess I'll say, leaders in this. There are a lot of communities that do this. One that we look to is actually Berkeley. And Peter and I are in a group called Marin Public Works Association. I know Belvedere has a program as well. I'm not sure what it's called, but it's not SLP. So Robert Zadnik would be who you want to contact. And he actually worked for Mill Valley at one point as well. So he's familiar with the maintenance aspect of these. So I don't really have a presentation, but I'm glad to discuss as much as you guys can stomach this topic. And I'll just start with your questions that you asked, try to go down them right away. How are the volunteer efforts assigned and coordinated? I've been with Mill Valley for almost 3 years, so I can talk to kind of the immediate past. And I'm not quite sure how it was done, but about 15, 20 years ago, this is kind of a passion project. So first of all, I should start, SLPs have been around forever. So they're all basically easements. When the land was granted to Mill Valley by the Tamalpais Land and Water Company, a lot of the subdivisions or whatnot had utility easements, and the city had a right to those. So most of these are in utility easements or something that was already granted to the city. There's debates or discussion about how they were granted and if we own it in fee or in title or whatnot, but that's worked itself out throughout the years. Probably about 20 years ago, this is a bit of a passion project. The fire chief, the former fire chief, they're all retired now, former fire chief, former recreation director, former park superintendent had a great interest in this, as well as a number of members of the community. They had the idea they wanted to refresh these things, and a lot of the SLPs that we have now, we call cowboyed in. They basically did it by brush clearing, volunteer efforts by putting in treads, digging trails, whether it was a Eagle Scout project, whether it was a neighborhood that wanted something in their area, and they went ahead and dug it in. They went through whatever training they could to get them built in. I'm not sure how they assigned it. Current day, as SLPs have become a more hot topic in Mill Valley in the last couple of years, and we can get to that as well, we actually hired a volunteer coordinator about 2 years ago. It wasn't specifically for SLPs, it was for all things going on in Mill Valley, whether it was cleaning the streets or getting help at the library, the rec center, or whatnot. This volunteer coordinator is part of our SLP team. We have an SLP committee that meets monthly. It was bi-monthly, twice a month for a while. We think we're kind of steadied the ship right now, but the SLP committee has a representative from the Public Works, well, a number of representatives from the Public Works Department. Myself is the director, an engineer, maintenance person. We've got someone from the Recreation Department. We've got someone from the Fire Department. We've got the volunteer coordinator, Police Department. We all meet monthly. So I think that's going to be my first overarching statement. Whatever you think SLPs are, they take a lot of care and feeding, time and investment. It's a big program. So back to our volunteer coordinator. Our volunteer coordinator is constantly looking for volunteers, looking for projects that volunteers can do, and she matches her best. She does her best to match the volunteer groups to projects that, one, they're interested in, two, they can do, three, they can commit to, that type of thing. We have a real good volunteer group. I think it's called Friends of the SLPs now, and they kind of have a lead, and they work with our volunteer coordinator and with our operations superintendent, and that's on the maintenance side and DPW, and they just kind of have a list of projects. These are the things, what things do you have that we can help out with, what things that we're interested in that you may need help with. And by the way, while we're out here walking the SLPs, we notice all these things that we can't take care of because we don't have the skills or ability to do that. So we're asking you, city, if you can help with this. A lot of those are whatever, handrails, maintenance of treads, things that we can kind of do ourselves, but some of them, there's levels of maintenance that are required. There's the little cleaning and brushing and handrails and treads, then there's larger ones that require drainage correction, redigging, regraded, and then there's the larger ones, which are some of the historical old ones that are basically completely dilapidated and they need to be completely rebuilt. So that's how volunteer efforts are assigned and coordinated at this point. Questions with that?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Can you be a little more specific about the maintenance post-construction or post-remediation and how that works vis-a-vis the city itself and the volunteer groups?
Maintenance post-construction vis-a-vis city and, well, I can tell you what our maintenance program is.
Yeah.
So this is interesting. It takes a lot of different departments. So we have a veg management program.
Yeah.
That's actually led in open space and most public right away. It's actually led by our fire department.
Oh, yeah.
So our fire department has a contractor that comes twice a year to all the developed SLPs, and that's something else that we can talk about. There's probably over 250 SLPs in Mill Valley, of which only about 100 are developed. So we have a map that shows which ones, and it's a guidebook really, which ones are developed that people are passable, and other ones that aren't passable. We only maintain the developed or passable ones. So as the fire department's contractor comes by and clears the vegetation, which is the main thing, they note anything that they see wrong with it. It looks good or it doesn't look good, loose railing, loose tread, loose whatever. Gets funneled through our maintenance department, and we go out and respond. We don't have a, go ahead.
The risk, the risk of getting in your part of the weeds, what if it's not a quote fire matter, but more, let's say, just as an example, a drainage matter? Then what happens?
It doesn't matter to us
Doesn't
whether it's a
matter,
fire
okay.
matter or drainage matter. We fix it as we can, as funds allow. There's, so steps, lanes, and paths. It also gets very tricky, whether it's a step or a lane or a path. If it's a trail, how much maintenance do you need? If it's a drainage issue, how much maintenance do you need? We don't go clearing roots out so people don't trip on them. But if it was a concrete step that was falling apart, it might be a tripping hazard, so we might fix it. So it kind of depends on the situation. We do have drainage issues for now. Some of them go over creeks, and some of the creeks have eroded the shores of them, so we need to fortify the creeks. So we're getting into some real money now where we need to take the bridge abutment and fix it. So that's a maintenance project, but it's something that's probably going to cost us about $70,000 to repair, so we need to seek funds for that. If okay with you, I'm going to go over question 2, easements.
Any other questions? I just have one. You said you had 100 that aren't developed. I know that we have a lot of trails that are on maps and have just been incorporated by property owners. Did you run into that same issue there, or?
When you say you have trails that are on maps but haven't been
They're mapped
incorporated.
out. They are on maps, right? If you look at the property map, it says trail or whatever, but what's happened over the years, they've never been used, they've never been developed, and the property owners have just fenced it and it's treated as yard. And
That jumps us to number 5 on the question.
Okay, then
It also jumps us to number 2 as well.
we'll wait till we get there. Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
no, it's an issue.
Yeah.
And those numbers, by the way, are very rough. I don't know if we have 250 or
Yeah.
271, but I know there's not as many nearly that are developed. So how are easements addressed with historic ownership and recorded easements were different? I don't know about whether there was an easement versus a historic ownership. I'm not quite sure what that question means. But I will tell you this. The vast majority of the community loves the SLPs. They love hiking them. They love telling their friends about them. They love walking their dogs on them. But the vast majority doesn't want to live next to one. So there's a lot of NIMBY. So it's probably one of the top things why the program doesn't continue to develop the other ones. The ones that have been built are the kind of low-hanging fruit. They're the ones that were able to be built. But in general, we have a whole list of priority locations that we want to build and a whole list of priority locations that we want to rebuild. The rebuilds are easier because they're already there and established. There is a great amount of, I don't know what the word is, difficulty, scrutiny, or whatnot. What's the alignment of this SLP? Because many of them are in the woods.
Right.
A lot of these people own houses on hills, and you got to get it all surveyed. We don't have it all surveyed. So our kind of standard answer now is if you think that's your property, then you need to give us a survey that shows that it's your property because we believe it's ours, we being the city. So there are a number of the SLPs that have been encroached upon where people have built fences or partial stairways, or they haven't been developed, but there's signs that neighbors have put up that says keep out or private property. So the city actually wasn't sued, jumping to number 5 because it's related, but the city manager was sued, and one of the bases of the lawsuits was you are not doing enough to protect our SLPs.
Interesting.
The city's response, and it's always the city's response before the lawsuit has always been, if we decide to build that SLP, then we will have that debate with whichever adjacent property owner has put a fence up or encroached upon it or whatnot. But until we actually develop it, it's not really necessarily worth having that debate. So, there's all sorts of reasons for putting in SLPs. The one that's at the forefront in today's day and world is fire evacuation, correct? So, the city feels a little bit stronger and boldened or whatnot that there's been some movement around the SLPs and there's been movement around fire clearance that we're going to have less pushback from the direct neighbors. I think that might actually answer number 2, unless there's any questions about that. All right, marching on number 3, funding sources. The vast majority of the funding comes from our general fund. So that's a challenge because the city doesn't have a lot of disposable income to play with these things. There's only a certain amount of money after we do the roads and the pavement and the fire and so forth to actually build and maintain and care and feed these. So this year, in this year's budget, we just went through our budgeting process. Numbers, we get about $35,000 a year, $50,000 a year for maintenance. And in our future CIP, we have around $150,000 for design and construction of new SLPs. The theory has been in the past, you design one year and you build it the next year. While you're building that one, you're designing your second one. So every year you're designing one and building one, designing one and building one. That really hasn't happened for many, many years. They're always way more tricky and difficult and controversial to design and build than you would think. A lot of it's because of the right-of-way. A lot of it's because these are utility easements. There's a PG&E pole in the middle, or there's a gas pipe under it. If it's not a utility easement, the reason there's not a home there is because, like Corte Madera, we live on Mount Tam. There's hills, there's canyons. A lot of them are drainage swales. That's all they are. They're basically an unbuildable drainage swale. So if you try to put anything in it, it's going to get washed out. It's not going to really be feasible to maintain. Going back to this year's budget that was just passed, we actually inserted some use of what we call municipal service tax. That's a local parcel tax that the city repassed. I don't know how much it is per parcel. I won't even say. But whatever, it generates money for the city for 2 main purposes. One is for road maintenance, and the other one is for fire. Usually that money has been used by fire for vegetation management. So the fire department has a very big, few $100,000 a year vegetation management program. The contractor that they use on this actually is paid for that through this process. About 10, 12 years ago, the city went after some money from the NT, and I always forget this acronym, maybe Peter, you can help it, NMTPP, Non-Motorized Transportation Pilot Program, I think it was back then. Yeah. And the city actually was successful. They won a grant, and that grant funded the construction or reconstruction, I think mostly it was new SLPs, of about 7 or 8 new SLPs. And these were big, expensive SLPs at the time. I think they probably cost about $200,000 each. These would be more formal concrete stairs. So the way it worked in the city, and I think it's probably typical in many cities, the ones that we say were cowboyed in or done by volunteers or the park superintendent and were dug with Eagle Scouts, treads, digging, so forth, those were volunteer, cheaper type efforts. The larger, more stout ones were done by engineering with design plans and specs and cost a lot more money. It's not to say anything's wrong with the volunteer program, but you need to understand what you're getting into when you build those. You're basically building in a long-term thing that you own and maintain, and eventually you might have to turn it into something else, whether it's concrete or stairway, redwood, stringers, whatnot, whatever the neighborhood kind of wants and whatever you can afford. Funding, I will tell you, so years forward from now, so one of the reasons I mentioned the NTPP, we went through a process that took us a long time. I know it happened in the town where I live as well, because I know Steve's on the committee, and you guys probably went through this as well, but you probably had to update your ped bicycle transportation plan. We just got that approved. It took us a few years to do it, but it includes a section on SLPs, and that was very important to us. We wanted that improved in the plan because we wanted to be able to apply for grants for the future. The most likely one that we think we can go after funds for is the ATP, so Active Transportation Program, so we'll see what we can go after in the future. Whether it will be successful or not, I don't know. Funding. So I mentioned that our budget more or less has $150,000 a year for designing one and building one. This year we did something a little bit different. It's the same budget, but we said, you know what, that's a lot to design one a year and then not build it for a year. We thought maybe we'd group the design together. And so what we did is we awarded a not-to-exceed fee contract for a consultant. We had an RFP. It just got out. It got awarded to a consultant to design up to 5 SLPs. With the feeling is we'd design them, we'd put them in a can, and we'd build them as we obtained funds. Well, one of the first scopes that we had that consultant do was put together conceptual cost estimates for the top 5 priority locations that we have. Mm-hmm. They ranged from all in $350,000 to $900,000 each. Each. So this is not a small program you're getting into. I can't emphasize that enough. We're going back with the consultant. We're saying, okay, that's great. That sounds like the platinum version, the all concrete stout one. That's not going to happen at $100,000, $150,000 a year budget, or whatever grant that we're able to get. So we're trying to work with them to say, go back to the kind of cowboy weight in, like, is there some standards that we can develop that in this section you're going to do it by a path, and the next 30 feet you're going to do by a wooden stairway, the 40 feet after that you're going to do by some treads, like really looking at the alignment of each one and seeing what the topography will allow us to do. Problem is, in reality, we've kind of built all the easy ones. We're already on steep canyons or ones that cross creeks or have rock faces or whatnot. So although the community really wants a lot more, I'm not quite sure how we're going to bridge the gap. I think that might cover funding. Any questions on that?
Any volunteer or foundational funding that Mill Valley has received throughout the
Donations?
donations?
I don't know about that. We do get a pretty good amount of donations for our recreation activities, our fields and so forth, and some other things various, but I don't know that we've really got SLP donations yet. That's something we can put our team on.
Okay.
How are evacuations route determined? I didn't know. I checked we have a fire battalion chief who's responsible for the veg management and responsible for the evacuation route markers and so forth. He wasn't there when it was developed, so he didn't know. So I had a guess, but I thought I'd better check with the fire chief. And he said, I wasn't here either, but it's probably common sense. There's a series of canyons in Mill Valley, like I'm sure there is here, and they wanted to make sure each canyon had an evacuation route. The SLPs in town are often referred to as the sidewalks of the hills because there's no sidewalks on the hills. So these was just looking at a map, seeing where is it a long distance for a pedestrian to have to walk around the block, so to speak, up a hill, down a hill, around a hill to get mostly downtown, mostly to Blythedale Avenue, and they just drew some straight lines. And that's how they decided what the evacuation routes are. Going to a kind of takes a village thing, the fire department does have, and I don't know if you have it here in Corte Madera, but they have an EPC, Emergency Preparedness Committee. I'm sure they were involved back in whatever year it was in helping designate which one needs to be an evacuation route and which one doesn't. We good on that one? Yep. Moving on to lawsuits. So yes, there was a lawsuit. So
Could I before you move on to the lawsuits, which is really important, but in terms of determining evacuation routes, do you know the history of how the original inventory was figured out in terms of did someone lay it out on a map, highlight it, inventory it, and others added to it over time? Do you know how that happened?
I have no idea, but I assume that was attempted probably every 10 years since 1912. Okay. Right? I mean, because that's when a lot of it did start, when the Tamalpais land grant, when they gave these to us or deeded them over to us, So I don't know for sure. I know I can say in 2015, the BPAC made an attempt to inventory them. They made an attempt to, the BPAC, as part of the Bike Ped Transportation Plan update, they went ahead and they wanted to survey them. It became overwhelming, so they had a subcommittee. They got a bunch of volunteers to walk as many as they could. They probably walked half of them, and they centered on things that were close to school for safe routes to school, and the ones they thought were heavily used, which were basically close and leading to downtown. And there was one other parameter they had, maybe within a 500 yards of a park or something like that. They were overwhelming. I mean, I don't know how many alleys or steps or lanes you have here in Corte Madera, but it's a big thing. And another thing is standardization. There really aren't a lot of standards for these, nor is it necessarily beneficial to actually build one, which is strange for an engineer to say. We've researched Marin County Parks and Open Space about standards. LA County has some, national parks, but you get into the ADA issues, and again, are you going to really maintain a trail through the woods? So that's a topic to consider. Ready to move on to the lawsuit? And I know I'm meandering a little bit. That's why I'm trying to make sure I'm getting your points. I don't know when the lawsuit was, about a year and a half ago at this point, and it came up. The basis of the lawsuit was, hey, Mill Valley, you're not doing enough to, 1, protect them, or 2, to grow the program. We as a community demand these things, we love these things, and we want to make sure that you're continuing to do it. So I think the next question is, how can you avoid the lawsuit? Is don't get started in something that you don't think you're going to continue. I mean, it's just something that takes a lot of staff time and takes a lot of funds, and folks love them, but I'm going to point out the NIMBY too. Not everybody wants one. It's never really happened, but there's concerns about safety. A lot of them are stairways, and people have built fences along them, so all of a sudden you have a dark stairway. It's not like we're going to put lights in the middle of the woods, so they are tripping hazards at night. There's not hours that you're allowed to walk on them or not walk on them. This concerns, it doesn't really happen, but it's been mentioned. What about homeless people or high school kids coming and smoking and drinking and all the natural things that you would think about? There really aren't a lot of issues. There's not really a lot of graffiti. There's not really much bad that happens other than the things deteriorate or wash out. So I think that's the points, but I'm glad if there's specific questions, thoughts.
Are there any questions from the BPAC, and then we'll turn it over to the public, and then we'll come back for comments? Or
Yeah, I have
questions?
one other. Now, am I heard on this mic? Is that, yeah. Going to the last point, which more or less is a generic question about attractive nuisance.
Yeah.
So can you say a few more words about, how that lawsuit was treated that way, or was it?
I don't know that that was a basis of the lawsuit. I don't know that that was mentioned. I think, you know what, actually I missed one other member of our SLP team now, meets monthly, is our code enforcement officer. So that was a number that was kind of broadcast out to the public. When folks, there was some garbage in some, there were some fences in some, there was a television dumped in one. That's the one that I remember, because nobody ever complained about this television before, but all of a sudden there was a pretty well-attended meeting. I think it was February of 2017. There was probably 150, if not 200 people at our community center. It was too big to have in our city hall. And it was not actually hosted by the city. It was hosted by some other volunteer group. The community was pretty riled up that the city wasn't taking care of these. So that led to some of the actions that we've taken, such as having an SLP committee be reinvigorated and meeting twice a month. And the lawsuit centered mostly on not care and feeding, but it was also, city, you don't even know which ones you have the rights to. So our attorneys were heavily involved, and we did a lot of research on every SLP. I mentioned that we have a map. It's actually a guidebook that volunteers put out with the city's approval, and the city actually, sells them for $5 at the community center, library, and at City Hall. And that's a guidebook, and it shows what's passable and unpassable, but it's not the official map. We actually now have an official recorded map of SLPs. That was part of the lawsuit. That's actually up on our website. There's a lot of interest from the community in improving that map, which makes a lot of sense, like which one's a step, which one's a lane, which one's a path. Because they're not all easy to find. A lot of them are hard. The signs are small. They're hidden by brush. And we said, that's a great idea. Who's going to do that? We don't have a formal database. That would just take more staff time. We also have had the conversations, well, you know what? Strava is out there. Under Armour apps are out there. You really don't need the city to pay anyone at the city to do this. The community itself does it. So REI has an app. So the city staff, we have an innovation grant, and one of the librarians actually said, hey, let's make an app that will actually take a picture of each one and show the elevation differences and all wonderful stuff. But does the city really need to get involved in that if the community, if whatever health activists do it themselves? So we haven't done a lot of that. The SLP committee, the SLP volunteer group actually has a developer on their team or someone that writes apps, so they might do something special, but right now the city's not committing any funds to it.
Any other questions from the BPAC? Okay, if you can stay here for
course.
just 2 more minutes, I'm going to open it up to see if the public has any comments. Please, go right ahead.
Good evening. My name is Anita Bach, and I'm here representing the Christmas Tree Hill Neighborhood Response Group. Our mission is emergency preparedness. So, whether this committee recommends embarking on an SLP or not, and thank you so much for the information you've shared, we would just urge this committee to add its voice to, encouraging the town, similarly with Larkspur, to addressing the evacuation routes. We are, of course, extremely concerned about wildfire this year, and many of our well-traveled pathways and lanes are in need of repair. The Gene Bean pathway, for those of you that are familiar with it, the stairs are cracking, breaking apart, the railings are broken. Many of the pathways and lanes are not cleared. There's brush, overgrowth, and none of them are signed as evacuation routes. So, we would just like to encourage you to lend your voice to addressing this as a priority. It's one of our greatest concerns. As you know, the roads are extremely narrow on Christmas Tree Hill. All it will take is one car accident on Summit to prevent any vehicular evacuation. People will have no option but to evacuate via the roads. And these pathways, which, will be vitally important in such a circumstance. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public? Yes, please.
Steve Lamb, I live in San Anselmo. I'm on the BPAC there. My question is, just came to mind, is the idea of signs. So how, it seems like many of them would not have signs, and I imagine there would be a priority or a way to determine if a sign is appropriate at a particular place. Because again, putting up signs at 100 different pathways seems not reasonable, actually. So maybe it's evacuation routes, but that would be my question is, how do you decide whether to put a sign or not?
Okay. We got another one here. Cindy?
Cindy Winter, I would like to comment on Steve Lamb's comments because every night I watch Channel 5 News for a while. That's my way of relaxing. And every night there's a talking head from a fire department saying, we don't know which way the fire is going to come from or go away to another place at any moment because there are winds and the fires create their own winds. And it's really complicated. So it's difficult to know whether there should be any signs at all. Maybe the best solution is for the neighborhood to know how to get from here to there. But then if fire is coming, you can't have firemen standing at every path and saying, go that way or take the road. This is a very complicated problem, and I came here hoping for some clear answers for Larkspur, but I haven't heard any, and I can appreciate the troubles.
Thank you, Cindy.
Hi, Mr. Mayor and Chairman. David Kuhnhart, 141 Hill Path. And where I'm coming from, being a resident next to a 110-year-old public pathway, I'm totally delighted being right next to that hill path. And I've participated over the years in various generations of clearing it out. Fortunately, I think it was the town that did a beautiful job of clearing it out very recently when I happened to be away. But building to some extent on Anita's commentary from NRG, a few times, even in the last year, an old map has arisen, and this might be what you were referring to, Bob, an old map of Christmas Tree Hill with about 32 different pathways on it, the great majority of which were never real. They were never pathways. Some of them are drainage ways, some of them are imaginary. Maybe it would have been a good idea at one point in time. But my suggestion, building on the great wisdom of Andy Poster here, would be to just keep it simple and only do those things that we think in the future we can maintain. And yes, there will be some logical evacuation routes, but many, many of those mapped lines are much too steep, or they lead right down into a canyon. Sort of an ankle-breaking trip down into a deep canyon, and then into fences, walls, and giant trees. And so it does take involving the people who've been climbing all over these hills to work together. I hope that Corte Madera can create such a pathway committee, but the big picture would be keep it simple and only look at those pathways that really would help in an evacuation. That is, they're not excessively steep, that they are fairly clear. They're not leading to blind points of danger, if you will. Thank you very much for taking this up.
Thank you, David. Anyone else from the public? Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the committee for comments. This is not an action item, so we're not voting on anything here tonight, but if anybody would like to make comments, now would be the time to do it. Start, Mark, down here, anybody? Tom?
Only to the point I was trying to draw out, which is, it's not just the creation of these paths or steps or lanes, but the future, the present and future maintenance of them, which encumbers the city, really ad infinitum, and does also as well at least present the possibility of having created some kind of attractive nuisance. And I think we should bear that in mind. That's all I guess I wanted to say.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else down here?
As always, I've got something to say. Before I talk about the SLPs, I wanted to compliment and appreciate Andrew for coming in and talking about this. I've followed Mill Valley's streets, steps, lanes, and paths for probably a decade, and have been so impressed with the volunteers and how it's all come together. And it's sobering to hear you describe it, because now we're trying to put our arms around it. Also, I wanted to really compliment Mill Valley on the Miller Avenue streetscape completion. That is really important from a bicycle pedestrian standpoint, and also the asymmetrical striping of Camino Alto was executed beautifully in terms of making the uphill lane wider than the downhill lane. I thought this was probably going to be a little bit easier. I know that Jenna Hale, maybe the Corte Madera Community Foundation, and others who have 40-plus years of experience in the town had begun the process of inventorying our SLPs, and I think that has been provided to Public Works. I think it likely has been. But when I hear what Mill Valley's gone through, I'm struck with, if the BPAC is going to begin the laboring ore on this, I think we're going to need to have it come back a couple more times, or at least one more time. And we're going to need to have an action item and more input from the community, and really decide whether or not this committee can take on that, or whether or not it'll be a subcommittee with volunteers that can meet separate from this committee. Because I really see, if the town council green lights as a policy, making an inventory of our Corte Madera Street steps, lanes, and paths, and then taking that inventory and sort of prioritizing it, and then working with the town council and Public Works. I mean, I see that as easily 6+ meetings of a subcommittee of this type before we should burden Public Works or the council with whether or not it really has the support of the town and makes sense to move it forward. So I'm encouraging it to come back again, dedicated as an action item, have the BPAC vote on various concepts of how we're going to move it forward, consistent with how Mill Valley has successfully done it. Not get down into the minutia, but really just talk about how do we inventory and determine, prioritize, and who's going to serve on that, and whether it can actually work, whether we can get enough volunteers to support it. I mean, I think if we put the word out and we get a BPAC that's filled with people, and we see a half a dozen or more people who are willing to serve in that volunteer capacity, then that will help us, vote on an action item and push it forward. And then the last comment I think I was going to have is, Andrew, I think my memory of the lawsuit was as follows: is there was a local law firm there that took it on pro bono, and the Gettler and Chavez, and I'm trying to remember the plaintiff, but she had served in a capacity. And I think what led to the settlement, which made sense to me, was that there was a specific path that was blocked, and the town reached a settlement that at least moved forward that aspect, and then made some other broader policy decisions about how things were going to be handled in the future, which led to the settlement. So that was a really good example to me of how a lawsuit can actually encourage better cooperation. It was unfortunate it got to that point, but that's why we have town's involvement from the beginning. We can anticipate those problems and head them off.
Okay,
That's it.
thank you. Anyone down here?
Okay. Cheryl Anjanati, I just think that it'll be important to involve the community, and the neighborhood response groups come to mind immediately. I think they have a lot on their plate already, but through them, we can reach out to other groups, and if there isn't that interest in the volunteers from the community, then I don't see this as viable. But I think we need to look into that and get people here at this meeting to really discuss it and commit to following through.
Okay, thanks. Yes.
Two comments. Besides, thank you for coming in and presenting. I see the steps, lanes, and paths as there are two valuable components to it. One, at least up Christmas Tree Hill, it provides a great path to get to the top. As a hiker and runner, I didn't learn about this until like 6 or 7 years ago, and it's a treasure, and I do it quite often. I don't even live in the community. I live on the other side of the freeway and come over here, and it's a treasure, and we'd love to see that maintained very well. And the second is, yes, as an escape route, I know, because we talked about, I guess, how to find your way down. I know in Mill Valley, there's the blue E on the street with an arrow, and once you know what that's for, some people say I never see them, but once you see one, you're like, I know that is how I get out. And because if you're driving and crazy trying to figure out how to get down, and suddenly you have to ditch your car and make it on foot, that's the way out. And I assume, forget the sign in naming. I love the fact that Hill Path is named and gold, Golden State. Thank you. And they're named. That's great. But having that E, blue arrow to escape is vital.
Thank you. Sure.
I guess I would chime in to say that. As part of our strategy is really, and it was kind of already echoed before, of really focusing on the trails that we have and promoting awareness of them. I think the more that people know they're there and learn to value them, I think it makes much easier to make a case for expanding them in the future. But we have a great infrastructure to work with, and I think we should really do the best with what we have at the moment.
Thank you. Andrew, first off, thank you so much for taking the time to come here this evening. Yes, please, go right ahead.
Just real quickly, based on what Member Bartlett said, just educational, not every SLP is an evacuation route. So the blue things was something that someone in the community created, and it is specifically for the evacuation routes. And the second thing Commissioner McPherson said is triggered with me, is something the town might want to consider is who's going to be the owner of these. Is it going to be BPAC, or is it going to be your EPC or your Planning Commission or your Park and Recs Commission? Is it going to be DPW or your Rec Department? You might not have to answer that question, but that's kind of come up. It's been assigned to Department of Public Works. But when we do something, we kind of need to march it around to all the committees, so it takes time, takes effort. So just something to think about. Sorry.
Thank you.
And Chair Vazio, if I may also thank Andrew for coming in and helping out, and then addressing a few of the comments that I heard that I think are noteworthy. I know you all are about to wrap up. So, there's a double-edged sword on the evacuation with the arrows. As was mentioned, fire can be directional. And so, in speaking with the fire chief about this topic, we probably won't be taking that route of saying this is the way to evacuate. There's also a couple of fire roads up there, the Southern Marin County Fire Road, as well as the fire road that goes over to Mill Valley. Those could be the only evacuation routes if the fire's coming up the hill. So because of the dynamic nature of evacuation, we probably won't take that, although I get why it's there and it does make sense. We won't take that arrow approach. Another question, when to sign? We'll probably, for this program, when we pick our, say, top 5 projects, we'll do basic wayfinding. This connects to there, small, simple signs when needed. I mean, in having spent some time in Mill Valley, in the hillside neighborhoods, there's a lot of them that are very visible. You walk, the angle of your line of sight shows you there's a path. You look down, not a lot of need, in my opinion, to sign too many of those. There are others where I went by them 10 times before the first time I saw them. Those might need a little additional wayfinding. So that's my general approach to those questions. And then I didn't think I saw anything else worth commenting on at this point. But again, thank you.
Thanks for putting this on the agenda. I guess we're going to turn this back over to Public Works at this point, but I just wanted to also add, the Community Foundation actually started working on this about a year ago and has actually done sort of a visual inventory of what's up there, and they actually had physical maps of what was supposed to be there. So some of the, there has been some legwork done on this by volunteers who could, and you could certainly benefit from that because they can tell you kind of what exists and what doesn't exist and, what's strange. And the signage part of this, I think, is also just really critical. I mean, we saw this as also part of a larger signage program that might also encompass, the bike paths and everything else. And, if we can design sort of a set of signs so that we can direct people to the town center, wherever they're going, or towards Mill Valley. But that was one of the things I always liked about it. The Mill Valley sign program, I think, is wonderful because, you're up on some of those canyon roads and you have no idea that you're as close to downtown as you are. It's a 10-minute walk down the steps. It's right there, and you think you're in the middle of nowhere, where the reality is town's just down a flight of stairs. And I think we have the same thing here that we can do to just help bring the community together. So this can be an evacuation thing, a safety thing, but also just a way to make the community more, cohesive, I think. So I guess we're turning it back over to you. Not a voting item.
Okay. Well, just to clarify, I heard that encouragement, and it was from committee member McPherson, but I trust, based on all the comments I've heard, that you're all in agreement. We'll come back with an action item. That action item will most likely involve request for things like, solidify the inventory, assess some initial costs, look at kind of taking the next step.
Okay. And I can put you in touch with Community Foundation people who have all the preliminary information they've done. That would be a good start for you. Moving on then to committee member reports. Any reports? Mark?
Parenthetically, I would report that the new Trans-Bay or Transit Empire Grand Central Station has opened, as you know, in San Francisco. And the reason I mention it is because it came with $1 billion price tag, and everybody is very proud of it, and rightfully so. It is quite a remarkable and handsome building. But as always, the footnote to that is that the current expenditure for maintenance on that building is $25 million a year. Wow. Yeah. So, and apropos of what we were just talking about, it's not just the construction of the thing, whatever it is, but we must always realize that maintenance can often be, and if you do the math, in 20 years, that'll be half the cost of the entire building, a mere $500 million. So.
Thank you.
No problem.
Reports, yes. Kirby.
I want to say 2 important things. It's great to have you back, Bob.
Thank you.
And 2, there's plenty of pizza left. I'm going to go for my 4th slice.
Good. Any other reports down here? Yes, Cheryl.
Yesterday Yeah, yesterday I attended a speaker series from the, sponsored by Age Friendly Corte Madera and Marin Villages, and the speaker was from the DMV. The DMV has senior ombudsmen to kind of interface when people have difficulties with their renewing their driver's license or maybe getting suspended. And I don't think many people know about this, so I just wanted to alert people. They're dedicated to helping seniors drive safely. Another thing is I came across some webinars from AmericaWalks.org, and they are specifically to help with pedestrian advocacy. And they're, the ones that I've seen have been very enlightening. So I want people to know about those also.
Thank you. No. Thank you. I guess I will just add, yes, I was involved in a bike accident. I was hit by a car. My wife thought that was incredibly ironic that I was the chairman of the BPAC and was struck by a car coming down Whites Hill, but I am mostly recovered now and will be fully recovered hopefully shortly with no permanent damage. So thank you all very much. It's great to be back. It's great to have a great crowd here, as always, for the BPAC meeting.
And I'll remind you,
my favorite committee.
I'll remind you, it was not a bicycle accident.
Oh, that's right. Yes, thank
It was
you.
a bicycle collision.
I was struck by a car, yes, going down the hill, going down Whites Hill.
Car that failed to yield the required 3 feet because the driver was too selfish.
That is correct. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, moving on to grant application updates. Item 6, Peter.
Thank you, Chair Ravazio, members of the committee. This is an exciting project for multiple reasons, but the first one is that the application for construction funds for this project came at me in a way that I had never experienced before until a couple months ago. I got a call from the Transportation Authority Marin. They partnered with us to develop the application that I believe you all supported a couple years ago. That was for design, environmental clearance. We call those things PA&ED, PS&E, but mostly, getting the project on engineering paper as well as getting it cleared environmentally. And we won the grant. It was in the $430,000 range. And the deadline for this next round of active transportation program is was in July. And about 6 or 8 weeks before that, the Transportation Authority of Marin called me and said, hey, are you guys planning on applying for construction money for Nellen and Warnham and Central Marin Pathway Gap Closure Projects? And I said, I kind of want to. I don't know if I have time. And they said, well, we'll tell you what. We'll pay to help get your application together, and you guys can review it and sign it and submit it. And I said, that sounds like a deal. So I took the deal. And, special thanks to RJ Suko, who guided this on our staff, as well as Parisi and consultants who were hired by TAM to dust off. In fairness, it wasn't an original application, right? They have to dust off what's already been hammered out for the most part, change some of the language, that type of thing. So it wasn't writing an ATP application from the start, which is a very difficult thing to do. But it has been submitted, and so now it's competing for construction money. And so just wanted to remind you all the project here and kind of orient you. This is the existing old spiral pedestrian crossing of US 101. This is the substandard pathway, frontage road / pathway when you're on the shoulder of US 101 if you're going over to Larkspur Ferry, or Jared might go over to Marin Brewing Company on his bicycle on this particular route. This direction would be more for, heading on the other pathway, getting you over to Sir Francis Drake. This area of town, as you all know, is in need of some multimodal improvements. And so very little change from the application prior, other than to ask for construction money, which is more money to improve the sidewalks here, fix this crossing. We are considering opening this to one-way traffic in the southbound direction, Nellen, that is. This site is being redeveloped currently as we speak. And the idea here is a protected bikeway. It could be a class 4, it could be a class 1, that we have flexibility in terms of how we build it. But here's the typical cross section where this is shown as a cycle track, a 2-way cycle track with a new sidewalk and 2 travel lanes, 1 parking lane. So what we give up in right of way in parking in one side of the street, we dedicate now to multimodal transportation. Luckily, it's not a heavily parked area. Tam Ridge is right here, and they have plenty of parking, in there. And then just contrast that to the existing condition with no bike lanes, parking on both sides of the lane. It's a dead-end road right now, so there's very low volume in this sidewalk here. And then, as you all know, we also have an existing pathway, a Class 1 pathway along Warnham, which is in need of some help. It's functional, it's bumpy. We heard from people earlier tonight, they don't like the bumps, so these bumps are probably going to come out. We'd love to get money from the ATP program to do that. This intersection is being studied right now for a potential mini roundabout that could fit in there. If this Nellen is opened up in the southbound direction, it would alleviate a lot of the peak hour traffic that comes down Tamil Vista, cues this really long 20-car left turn lane to access 101 primarily. So we have peak hour pushes mostly driven from Redwood High School trip generation. And so one idea is to alleviate some of that, and we're going to need some traffic control here. It says proposed traffic signal. We're looking at all options for traffic control at that location. So that's just a reminder on the project. I'll go through a couple of the zoom ins here so that you can see them. This was part of the, again, so when we do a grant application, we don't submit engineering plans. These are what we call concept plans, just kind of give you an idea of what the project looks like. So nothing in here is at the engineering level, but enhanced crosswalks that can be seen, at basically at all intersections. Here's Tamil Vista and Warnham, and then here is Nellen and Warnham, which again, this intersection could change depending. This is showing where 101 goes over the top and Warnham goes underneath. Some different alignments for widening and enhancing the pathway, the parkway as well. This is a critical connection to the Redwood Highway Class 1. So this intersection is heavily traveled, safe route to school. Will receive some enhancements with the project as well. The bulk of the cost of this project, though, as you all probably know, is the fact that if we build a separated multimodal pathway along the west side of Nellen, then we're going to have to realign the curb, gutter, drainage. Those things get pretty expensive. In a sense, rebuilding this section of road, and that's why we're asking for around $2 million or some portion of that to come from the state. As you all know, this actually shows the potential for the opening up of this traffic in this direction. And this actually has it routing as 2-way traffic, but no northbound outs. Obviously, this is an on-ramp to Caltrans southbound 101, so we can't have that conflict there. Again, enhanced crosswalk there. This is a troubled crosswalk. We're going to have trouble getting something improved here. Caltrans is going to have some say on this. It is on their ramp. But again, the connectivity over to the bridge here is going to be important. A little bit more of the other end of Nellen, connecting again to the overcrossing. So I just wanted to let you all know you supported and worked on this project before, and we have applied for ATP grant money. It's the most competitive program in the state. Many people get turned away. It's like trying to get into UCLA or Berkeley. Most people don't get the ATP grant. So just heads up. Fingers are crossed. If we don't get it this time, we'll apply again. And I've done this before and been successful when you try to find out, how your application was evaluated, what scores you got, where you did well. We can always reapply if we don't get it. So that's it. That's my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions on the grant application that was submitted in July.
Any questions from the BPAC?
Well, there's a lot of details here, Peter, and actually I don't believe the BPAC ever looked at design previously. It was submitted in a rush the first time around also.
And this time around, amazing.
So, it's great that we've gotten this far, but I'm a little concerned how much flexibility we might have in the future for
We're at 0% design. We have all the flexibility we want.
Okay.
Is Tam Ridge fully leased?
I believe their occupancy is in the 80 to 85% range.
Okay, so all the
It's
all
been
the
ticking
buildings-
up.
Actually, I spoke to someone who said they're down to like 10 vacancies
Okay.
at this point.
Out of 100, yeah. So maybe 90%.
Yeah. So that'll, I was
And-
just wondering
and
whether.
interestingly, sorry, just one more
Yes.
thing. A lot of people are going there and not getting cars
Yeah.
because they want to walk everywhere.
Well, that was my, the concern about traffic and parking, et cetera, et cetera. I was wondering whether we're having real-time examples of overflow parking on Nellen, and it sounds like we are. In other words, people are not using Nellen that much for parking from Tam Ridge.
It's underparked.
Yeah, it's underparked. In terms of Warnham and the path on Warnham, is that pathway have any obligation, does the state have any obligation or easement with the DMV's adjacent ownership?
No, there's no obligation from the state.
Okay. And just curious, what would be the upside of opening up Nellen to one-way vehicular traffic?
The upside is peak hour circulation, especially if you have a protected bike lane. Nellen would see small volumes about 1 hour a day. And it would alleviate the queuing that happens at the Tamil Vista Warnham intersection, which is poor level of service. You don't always make the signal in the left turn channelization.
Okay.
Any other questions from the BPAC?
I just wanted to clarify, because I know when the BPAC first started, the bike path on Warnham was an issue with the tree roots growing up, and the issue of getting it fixed was that DMV, I guess, maintained that pathway.
That's not an issue.
Okay.
So I've looked into it. Actually, DMV's parking lot is partially in our right-of-way. We've done a detailed survey for the Tamil Vista Complete Streets project. We're looking to reach out to DMV to see if we can get some of their, I guess, west-facing parcel, if they're willing to look at their parking and help us with that project. But we don't have any issues with the Warnham pathway as relates to DMV. And then since it's come up a couple times, I will say that the Warnham pathway rehabilitation is not dependent on the ATP grant success. So it would be one thing where, okay, maybe we don't compete well. We don't have disadvantaged community points on this project, or very few of them. And so if we get turned away by the state, we could look at other sources or internal sources to rehab the Warnham path.
Cool.
Any other questions from BPAC? Okay, I'm going to open up to the public, and again, this is not an item that we're taking action on or voting. This is informational, but anyone who wants to speak or comment, please, I need you to come to the microphone and again, state your name. And we're on television, so for the record, thank you.
Janet Furman. My question is about the northern end of Lucky Drive right over here. It's my understanding that that's Caltrans land, but it's really in pretty awful shape. It gets flooded every winter. It's even flooded regularly in the middle of summer. I don't know where the water comes from, but also that street, the pavement on that street is horrendous. So my question is, what would it take to cure the flooding problem there? And is that part of the discussion?
Thank you. Can you address that, or?
Sure. So County of Marin is the jurisdiction holder there. What it would take to fix the flooding problem is a lot of things. And no, it's not a scope of this particular project, unfortunately.
Because that's tidal, right?
It's tidal.
Coming up the creek.
Yeah.
We need a huge wall. I've looked into this before, yeah, it's.
I've heard a lot of proponents of
enormous.
building walls lately,
Yeah.
Chair Ramazia.
Any other questions, comments?
Walls are for climbing.
Cindy Winter, I'm going to point at this map, if that's okay. Right here, there's a bus stop. A lot of people take the bus, they get off here, and they will not be inclined to go down to the crosswalk. They want to take the shortest, most direct route to the pedestrian overcrossing so they can go to work in this area. And there may be a way to fix that, but human nature being what it is, I think that has to be taken into account. Cheryl and I have had some discussions about this over the years, so that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then I will bring it back to the BPAC for any comments. No? Peter, thank you so.
Question, when do you hear from ATP, Peter?
They have on their website, I believe, November. So they're evaluating hundreds of statewide applications.
Peter, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Moving on to item 7, USBR 95 route designation through Corte Madera.
Great. I'll start off briefly before Jared takes over, just to let the BPAC know that this was on the consent calendar at the last council meeting. One council member had a few questions and requested that it come to BPAC for input. And so here we are. And I think Jared knows as much about it as I do, so I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, Peter. So USBR 95 route designation, United States Bicycle Route 95. So a little bit of background is we were contacted by a representative of the California Bicycle Association. There was a committee, or what was the Bicycle Action Committee, and they're associated with AASHTO and Caltrans are assisting them, and the route designation was requested to come in from the north via Larkspur and exit to the south to Mill Valley. And the route goes from the Canadian border down to the Mexico border. So it cruises along the west coast. It's a long distance route, and it basically just follows the coastline, and it tries to capture where long distance riders would choose to ride if they were traveling any part of that segment. It's intended to be a guidance for those long distance riders and anybody who really wishes to ride along the route. That's our understanding. And yeah, so we are contacted, being an agency or municipality within the route, and we took a look at it, and we took a look at the preferred route, or at least the route that was suggested to us. It appeared to be direct, and that's this option number 1. So we're basically looking at 2 options here tonight. I'll start and describe option 1 here briefly. So that's Magnolia. As you go in Larkspur, travel south, and you go into Corte Madera, transition to Corte Madera Ave, and then on to Camino Alto, up over the Corte Madera Hill down in the Mill Valley. So we tried to separate out some pros and cons of this particular option, and here on the left, or on the right side, you can see the pros listed there. I just mentioned direct. This is the route that was presented to us via AASHTO and Caltrans. And then this is, like I said, really applicable for any distance cyclists, whether it be just somebody going from Larkspur down to Mill Valley via Corte Madera, or coming from way up north and traveling south through San Francisco, say. And then also, this aligns. We've spoken with Larkspur Public Works as well as Mill Valley Public Works, and this particular route picks up where each one of those departments drop off and or pick up, depending on which way you're going. So like you can see on the red there, Larkspur delivers their current route via Magnolia, and Mill Valley picks it up via Camino Alto. So jumping over to some potential cons, looking at heavier vehicle traffic. It's hard to see, you don't see option 2 yet, but this route is traveled relatively heavy compared to option 2 by vehicles. There's limited shoulder, being no class 1. We have class 2s and 3s on this route, including the Corte Madera Ave and Camino Alto. And it's a steeper hill coming up over south out of Corte Madera. So now you can see what you're comparing to, option 2. So here's basically the route that we're looking at for an alternative. So coming out of Larkspur, we would send from Magnolia to the Larkspur Corte Madera Class 1 path, and then onto Sandra Market Trail, and then send that east over to Tamil Vista, south on Tamil Vista to Sanford, and then into Meadow Sweet, around to the Mill Valley Bike Path. And then that would have to then, just beyond the image here, extend back west to along Lomita to the Mill Valley Sausalito Class 1 path. So looking at a side-by-side, here are some pros. This uses a Class 1 facility along the Sandra Market Trail and the Corte Madera Class 1 path. So a little nicer along a multimodal point of view there. And then obviously the streets that it touches on with Meadow Sweet and namely Meadow Sweet being less traveled than our other option. So some cons here, so more indirect. Obviously you can see it swings around quite a bit, and we're trying to look at it more of a point of view of if we were to compare this particular choice with a cyclist that is observing the Route 95, whether they mean to or not, coming down Magnolia, will they take this, or will they continue along the more kind of understood path, which is just along Corte Madera Ave back over to Camino Alto. So we feel that it's probably going to be less traveled as a designated route if it goes, swings around, than if it were on Corte Madera and Camino Alto, just for the sake of the indirectness. So then the last concern we have listed over on the cons is just to really keep in mind the population that will be using this route for the long distances, and then we're sending them into a little bit more of a Class 1 recreational path with more people recreating and walking and jogging and taking dogs walking. So we just want to keep that in mind and definitely weigh that in. From that.
Is that all? Yeah. So, so Chair Ravazio, members of the committee, I guess at this point we'll turn it back over to you or any public comments. What we'd like to do is just have your preference. Do you have a preference between one or two? Do you prefer that the town, designate the route or not designate the route? Council did ask for us to, get your point of view on it. So I'd like to take that direction away when we're done.
Okay. And again, this is directional. This is not a voting item.
Yep.
So I'm going to start by having the BPAC, if you have questions, first off for staff, we're going to start there and then we're going to turn to the public. So any questions? Yes, please.
I'm just curious, what's the mileage difference between the two routes? I know this one's longer, but I'm just curious how much longer it is.
I think it's probably 2 to 3 miles.
Yeah.
Option 2
Yeah.
is precisely 3.2 miles longer to get back to the base of Camino Alto.
Okay.
Well, someone did a calculation. The other thing to think about is the connectivity to the other end, right? So on either end, obviously the Larkspur connection is simple, but when you're connecting to Mill Valley, Mill Valley Public Works Department told us that the next time that this pathway connects is basically at Almonte and Miller Avenue at the Sausalito Mill Valley pathway. And so that's the connection point. But anyway, yeah.
Yes, Kirby.
Where, as you go north through Larkspur, where is this path going to?
If you're a cyclist in Marin and you've ridden out to the Java Hut, you know the route.
So it's going west.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Has Mill Valley agreed to sign Camino Alto?
Yes.
Any other questions down here? Yes.
Is there an option 3?
There's an option 3 if that's, yeah, absolutely. All the options are on the table.
Go by your house.
Alto Tunnel.
There's no cost to the town on either option on this,
No, there's not.
right? Okay, so it's paid for by signage. It's basically a signage thing and it's paid for by this other organization.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'm going to open up to the public for questions or comments.
Cindy Winter, this is my territory. I know it intimately. And I also did a lot of long-distance cycling when I was younger. And my experience is that long-distance cyclists can cope with just about anything. And they also tend to want to get from point A to point B fairly directly because they want to get off their bikes and enjoy the scenery at their destination. So I would say that the more direct route is probably preferable. And I see a lot of them going along Magnolia, at least 5 a day easily. And they have their big panniers and all their gear. And they don't seem to be bothered by the traffic. It's hard to tell, but they're just pedaling right along. So I don't know. We were not asked in Larkspur if we had an opinion, so I guess I represent the Larkspur cyclists here. I'll tell Julian, I'm curious where it goes at the north end, because you don't want the cyclists, the long-distance cyclists, going along Drake. There are back routes.
Yeah, correct. It avoids Drake. It goes along Magnolia all the way through Larkspur.
Okay, but after Larkspur, does it go through Ross? Does it go
goes
on
through
Shady
Ross,
Lane?
on Shady Lane,
Oh,
and
good.
then
You know-
downtown
you
San
know the
Anselmo, and then you hang a
territory, too.
left right by the Quickie Mart,
Oh, okay.
and you head over towards Fairfax.
Perfect.
Yeah, we know that route.
I did my field work.
Any other questions or comments from the public? Okay, hearing none, then I guess what we'll do is we'll come back to the BPAC, and if anybody who wants to offer an opinion, if you have one, now is the time to do it. Yes, Cheryl.
I think directness is the primary criterion here. I've used Adventure Cycling Maps, which I think is one of the sponsors of this program, and you know, it's a pain to always have to look at your map and be aware. Oh, I have to turn in 500 feet or whatever. You know, so directness is key. And for the cyclists that are going to be using this route, they're, as Cindy described, I think they're experienced and they can handle the hills and the traffic even with full panniers.
My curiosity
Thumbs up from
on,
Leaf.
oh yeah. I guess the direct does make sense. I questioned, is there an option 3, because, could you put option 2 up? Like, I get the Sandra Marker Trail. I don't get sending them on Tamil Vista. That's like just not a bike friendly. My thought was, did they instead go, is it called Sandra Marker if they, in the turn, I don't know what that pedestrian path, Sandra Marker as
Along
it
the
turns
canal?
south. No.
Right here?
No, go left, west, 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 west. There. Okay, if it just went down. From there, it just goes down and then hits, and then goes east. I mean, we just redid this road right here, and it's got a beautiful trail, and it's part of the east, north-south Greenway. But if I were to give an option 2, that would have been my option 2. But I get direct, so that probably makes more sense.
Anybody down here want to weigh in?
Yeah,
Please, Jay.
sure. I think the directness and the uniqueness of option 1, the experience you get from that is very, I think, more speaks to this area a lot better.
Dave?
So, just as a policy matter, I'm all in favor of having the bike route be designated through the town. It brings with it a lot of publications that will be developed over the years. In other words, Sunset Magazine follows these bike routes, Velo News, all of these various publications will track it through town. And I belong to a group called onewarmshowers.org, where you post your home. My home is on Corte Madera Avenue, about halfway up. So we host at least 12 to 20 touring groups every year. They just camp in our backyard. We give them showers. They come from all over the world, and it's a fascinating way to interact with folks coming through town. Of course, then what we do is we direct them to the town center. They go down to the town center. They explore REI. They spend their money. And, you know, they drop $200 a head every time they come through. And so getting Corte Madera on the National Bike Route is very beneficial for the community and for merchants. Option number 1, in my view, goes without saying. I mean, I live on Corte Madera Avenue. That's the only way that long-distance touring cyclists go. Option 2, as I indicated, is a 3.2-mile unnecessary detour that crosses over 38 intersections and over 100 driveways. So it is completely inconsistent with being safe. And also, it's just inconsistent with all the existing published guides, both online Strava-type touring directional assistance that cyclists are using. All of the published books and maps all use Corte Madera Avenue. So I don't really see option 2 as a viable option.
I think I would agree with everyone else too, that I think option 1 is it. As someone who until recently did some long distance bike rides, I can assure you that you do try to find the shortest distance between 2 points. You know, it's just easier and faster. And I have seen many bikers who are doing long trips on Magnolia and Corte Madera Avenue. And, you know, if we tried to force them to go the other direction, I think they would probably end up just going up over Camino Alto anyway. So if they're going to sign it and everything else, which I guess they are, I would also agree with everyone else here, and I would say let's just go ahead with option 1.
Thank you all. We have clearly heard you. And the other thing, I wasn't quite sure that we're going to get any money to put up signs. One of the things that the resolution that will go to council next week is a resolution that the council understands that this is the designated route. And that you allow the route to be designated officially. And then in terms of signage, you know, again, my philosophy on signage is wayfinding where it's needed. Maybe one sign at the intersection of Tam and Corte Madera Ave could help, but otherwise, not a lot of need for signage for this particular, not a lot of confusing points. For me, the signage really needs to be better in you know, San Anselmo and Ross, and
Yes.
that's where you can take a wrong turn.
Well, I find that I'm always giving people directions, or they're going to their online, or they're going to their books at Redwood, at Corte Madera Avenue, right across from Menke Park. They're trying to decide
Yeah.
what to do. So maybe at the base of the hill there, that would be great.
Okay, understood.
Thank you. So now we're on item 8, project updates. Peter?
Actually, I was.
Jared?
Sure. I just waiting for the
Both-
slide to come up, and
both
I can
here?
make the decision here. Okay. All right. So Casa Buena, complete streets. Just a quick overview. Jared will walk you through the segments. This is a project that we are committed to and have the funding to complete design. I think we listed 70% design on here. So we have this segment funded. We don't have any construction money allocated, and I just wanted to remind folks that, you know, to complete design, we're looking at a few more $10 or $20 or $30,000, and then construction is in closer to the $2 to $3 million range because of the nature and the complexity of this project, which you'll understand as Jared walks you through. But I continually get questions from the community and from council members, you know, what's the status, how's it looking, what does the design look like, and so we thought we'd show it to you now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So here we have Casa Buena, starting here at the intersection of Sanford, and it wraps around here to adjacent to 101, and it flows all the way south to the Mill Valley Bike Path entrance right here, Horse Hill. So we're going to start by looking at this section adjacent, parallel to Highway 101. And here's a cross-section of what we're looking at, looking southbound. So you can see 2 travel lanes here, a Class 3 on the downhill or northbound side of the road, a Class 2 on the uphill or southbound direction, and parking, designated parking on the side, and then a wide sidewalk 4 to 5.5 feet. It varies. I just described that. And so basically we have a sidewalk, a brand new sidewalk for, what would you say, Peter, 2/3 of the way, plus or minus, on the west side of the road. And we have various bump outs for conforming to existing driveways that are currently steep in many locations, and where they intersect the current roadway, it's just going to be too difficult to try to keep the sidewalk consistent all the way along here. It's going to be a lot of severe grading back up these driveways. So we're actually going to be bumping the sidewalk back in, and that just eliminates on-street parking. In those locations, the Class 2 going south is still going to have full width all the way through there. We might lose that that outside-most stripe here, but we'll still get our Class 2 going south. And yeah, so new sidewalks. We're going to be adding a little bit to the width of the paved section on the freeway side or the east side of the road to get all of these features that were just mentioned with the Class 3 downhill bike lane there. So that's one phase, and then going back to the other phase, which I think we're on the agenda, was broken out. That previous section was about 70% designed. This one, on the other hand, is actually phase 1, and it is about 100%, very near 100% designed, and hopefully soon to be built. But this is the 2-part. The traffic mitigation or reduction intersection redesign here, and then Casa Buena improvements along here at over to Canal. So here's a quick Google Earth shot of the existing intersection. I'm sure everybody is aware the confusion that happens here on a daily basis. It's pretty bad.
Awful.
We've looked at it, and some of the problem areas are this through left movement. It doesn't have a lot of storage here, so you have cars that queue up in here, eliminating cars' abilities to take the right on red. Also blocking cars over here in this short queue spot. So yeah, this is a very confusing intersection currently. And here's the proposed
Confusing drawing. Wow.
redesign. So sorry for the small font, but I'm gonna step you guys through this. Basically here, starting up top, we have that through left movement. and it has a pocket back all the way to here of where it can queue cars, much more storage capacity. The bike lane is dashed through here, so there is a designated bike lane now. It's going to be painted green. It's going to be highly visible. And the right-hand pocket also stores more as it wraps back here. So we like the ability to stack more cars all through here. It really will make this northbound movement and storage capacity much improved. The biggest, probably most notable improvement to this intersection is the elimination here of the northbound vehicular traffic along Sanford. This is what we thought was probably the main concern and the driver of the confusion at this intersection. So we felt that eliminating it would probably be the most effective way to calm this intersection and really straighten it out, if you will. The northbound traffic has alternate routes to exit, obviously running east over to Canal or going west as an alternate relief. But what we have done is we've made a nice little slip for bicycles to flow through here, protected. There's a median island right here that keeps them out of the oncoming traffic, and we've also redesigned the curves at this sidewalk here to reduce the ped crossing and hopefully slow cars down east and west out here on Meadowsweet. The other notable change that we studied pretty closely is we pulled the crosswalk that used to be right here going north-south, and we pulled it back over east, over to here. We feel that this keeps the crosswalk out of what is still a somewhat confusing intersection. There's limited sight lines for cars that are traveling west over here on Tam and making the U-turn or making the turn onto Casa Buena and traveling this way. Pedestrians crossing right here aren't immediately seen by cars or large trucks which are making this turn. So pulling that crosswalk over here really helps to create a safer environment for peds crossing the road. Another thing that does is we were out here and over a short amount of time on multiple occasions witnessed several people not using the crosswalk that's currently existing right here. They were actually coming over here and just crossing the road to get to this bus stop right here. So we feel that pulling this really speaks to what the community is already doing and that is crossing the road right here. So that's, I think, just as valuable of an improvement as any other in this intersection. And we've bulbed out right here to really reduce that ped cross distance, reduce vehicular traffic coming through here as a safety measure. And probably the biggest concern we feel may be pushback from community is the elimination of the on-street parking right here. So we do understand that is happening, but yeah, that's pretty much a good overview of the Casa Buena traffic relief intersection here.
Thank you. So again, this is not an action item. This is informational. So we're going to start with any questions from members of the committee. Yes.
Where is the crosswalk you're referring to relative to the Pete's parking lot?
No.
It's the Pete's entrance is right here.
Oh, yeah.
So it would be west of the Pete's, basically?
Correct.
The driveway? Okay.
Questions?
How many parking spots are eliminated with this design?
I didn't count. Peter, did you? Five.
Upon observation, was there a lot of traffic from the library to the mall type thing, pedestrian traffic? Did you feel maybe kind of rerouted and?
Well, we have definitely a capability for pedestrians to cross both here and here, and that's a direct route up here. If they choose to be going that route as opposed to crossing the road right here. We didn't see a high volume of people going from the library over to the town center parking at the time we reviewed it.
Any other questions from the BPAC? Okay, I'm gonna open it up to the public. Again, if you can limit your time to 3 minutes, that would be great. Thank you very much.
David Kuhnhart, Hill Path. To take my daughter from the library to Christmas Tree Hill, eliminating that northbound slot, what's my route?
I think you mean driving a car, because we were just having a pedestrian conversation. I would say you'd put one foot in front of the other, and you'd get there in about 15 or 20 minutes. But if you want to drive, you have a couple options. In the off-peak, you probably go up to Lakeside, hang a right, and make a left onto Tam. In the peak hour, that's a difficult movement. So in the peak hour, you're going to go around the Canoe block. You're going to head east, and then you're going to make a left on Canoe, and then you're going to make another left on Casa Buena, and then you'll have all this queuing and space and lack of confusion in your automobile as you approach the Tamalpais traffic signal. The difference in time is in the 30-second range. There is a little bit of rerouting. The volumes on Meadowsweet and Canoe and Casa Buena are quite low and can handle this shift in traffic pattern. The other issue to recall, Jared and I went over the numbers. We counted the peak hour movements that would shift. We're looking at, in the highest hour, about 171 cars that we counted on multiple observations. That was the highest number, would shift from northbound Sanford to what would be westbound Casa Buena. Is that a lot of cars? Most intersections like this can handle around 2,000 or 3,000 cars an hour. So 171 is, I would say, an insignificant change. So,
thank you.
Patty Stolier, Casa Buena Drive. Couple things. First is the question was, how do you get from the library to go across to town center, and you would go through Pete's parking lot and to the new crosswalk. So it's in a perfect place. And second, I think you probably lose about 6 or 8 parking places, something like that. It seems like in that area. And what Jared said about how the driveways come as you're going on the further south part of Casa Buena, that we would lose some on-street parking. Is that the only option? Is it possible to get some purchase of land and take a little bit of that? I mean, nobody's house is there; it's their mailbox. So I've always wondered about using part of the west side of the street. And my last question is, you said soon to be built. I wondered what soon meant. And I also wondered for the other part, the Casa Buena South, what kind of timeline you're thinking of that, Peter?
Peggy Burnett, 14 Laurel. As I recall, there was going to be a survey done, and the streets would be marked the way you propose in this design, and to get feedback from the community. Is that still in the plan? Mm-hmm. Okay. And my other question is, what happens if the survey shows that people don't want this proposal? Are you open to other alternatives? Okay, that's all.
And to be clear, we're not making any kind of decision on this evening. This is purely informational for the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. This will be decided by people more powerful than us. This is
Not than you.
Committee's more powerful.
Committees. Yeah. Anybody else? Back to you then.
Sure. A couple notes that I took that I can respond to. So we had, when I was working with this project with Kelly Crow in the in the spring, we had some ideas of wanting to get the intersection improvements at Sanford and Casa Buena done before the calendar year end. I don't think we're gonna be able to do that. So we'll do it next year. We have the funding for it. It's a $400,000 project. And as Chair Ravazio said, we don't get to make that call. We make our case to the council, and they authorize it to go out to bid or not. So that's the timeline, 2019 calendar year for redesigning and I think significantly improving this intersection in my traffic engineering opinion. And then it's a lot easier to fund a $300,000 to $400,000 project that's already in the CIP and already in the budget than a $2 to $3 million project that doesn't have any construction money. And so that will be another question that we're going to go back to council for once we're at 100% design and ask them for direction and funding sources for Casa Buena Complete Streets as you head further up. And then what if the community doesn't like, so the test for me is really taking away the northbound movement where people queue at the yield and don't know to keep clear and don't know whose turn it is. And so what we would do is for a period of time in the peak hour, it could be for 2 peak hours, it could be for 2 days, just take away that movement, put a blockade up and just see how the community gets around. See how long it takes, see how much they freak out. And then, observe really for me as in the field that Jared and I are in, we need to observe data. We need to find out, how long it takes, how many people are cutting through Pete's, those type of questions to be answered. So that was the idea, at least my idea on a trial run.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to bring it back to the BPAC now. Again, we're not voting on this, but we can provide direction. So if anybody has any comments to provide to staff, now would be the time to do so. Anything? Yes? Cheryl?
Well, I think there's some really nice things about this design, moving the intersection or the crosswalk. As Patty said, that I go to the library all the time. I'm walking through there, and I walk by Pete's, get a nice sniff of coffee, and cross Meadow Street.
Rebel,
across
Cheryl,
the
you
street.
sniff the coffee? Wow, I drink it.
Crazy.
And the other thing I like is that you're using a concept, the Dutch call it, I think, filtered permeability, or some people call it that, where bikes can go where cars can't. And going on the northbound there on Sanford and having a island, I guess, protecting those on bikes, I think that's really nice. So I'm really glad to see this, and I think it'll significantly improve safety. I'd really like to see the library be a place where parents could say to their kids, go take the books and return them before they're overdue and get them out on their own to do that, So I'm pleased. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone down here? Yep.
So for at least 6 months, anticipating that the northbound at Sanford was going to be potentially blocked, my journeys in the car to Marin Joe's, the library, Pete's, Bank of America, I've been doing just that. I have been avoiding going north. And I have found it to be intuitive and easy if I've already visualized it blocked. So for me, it works in the vehicle. The only other thing I would also comment on is I noticed 11-foot vehicular travel lanes spec'd in general for Casa Buena and 8-foot parking. And I'm a huge fan of 10.5-foot vehicular lanes. I don't think that road needs anything wider than 10.5, and 7.5 for the striped parking, which frees up an additional foot.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this looks terrific also. I go through that intersection every once in a while, usually coming back from Marin Joe's as well, and it's always confusing and difficult. And I also know there was a pedestrian struck a few years ago where you're right around where you're thinking of putting that crosswalk in. So
Oh, yeah?
I'm sure that's in the town records because it was actually, I think it was a potential law case. So I think this looks really good because this is an incredibly difficult and confusing intersection. And while I'm sure it will we'll go through some adjustment period if we ever do this. I think eventually it'll be a huge fix. So thank you. Okay, moving on to the minutes of the June 21st meeting. Are there any changes or additions to the minutes from the June 21st meeting? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to
We can't approve them.
ask for approval, and I have to recuse myself because I was not part of the meeting, so I will not vote, but
So I'll move to approve the minutes
Second.
from the June 21st, 2018 Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
is there a second?
Second.
Second, okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And I recuse myself from it, abstain.
I
and-
recuse also, just for the record. Same reason, I was
Same
not
with her either,
present.
okay.
Couldn't approve anything.
I can't approve it. And we need to pick the next meeting date. October 18th is the proposal.
Works for me.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you, and then we are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Thank you all for coming this evening. Appreciate it.
Good meeting.
Thank you.